Hey guys, how's it going? Good day.
Good day.
Good day. Wherever you are, maybe morning, maybe night, maybe taking a lunch break. But we're here for another episode. I think this will be a fun one. We've kind of, we've talked all about different stuff, power supplies, routing, and I think this is something that some people are kind of get confused on, honestly, when it comes to wiring up their own boards or buying specialty cables to run certain types of pedals. So today is going to be on the topic of kind of like daisy chaining power supply, like not do's and don'ts, but like how you should, if you're going to split off of a power supply, which pedals are, the best to do it, which ones are not the best to do it. Because sometimes, you might get really excited to buy that HX Stomp and throw it on your board and you find out that it needs more power. You can't power it from, your power supply, or you need a specialty cable. So it'll be a really interesting conversation, and I'm curious, to see what you guys' thoughts are on it and just kind of go from there. But I would start off with, when someone comes to either of you guys or even me for a setup, and they have a Zuma, but they have 12 pedals. What is your first go-to when you recommend, let's just add on another pedal, or do you, if their budget is only for the board and they can't add on a power supply, what are you splitting for power? Are you splitting for power, and how do you go about that?
Dr. Mason?
Well, this is actually a really common thing that happens regularly, and I think it kind of happens on two ends. Like sometimes there's like a budgetary constraint that has somebody maybe choose, like they can only use this supply. Sometimes it can be a space constraint. Or sometimes on the other end of it, they have too many power supplies because they want everything to have its own individual isolated power output, which is great. But often it's not necessary, and it can take up a lot more space if you have to use multiple supplies in order to get everything powered. And so usually the rule of thumb, and this isn't universal, but I'd say most times it works, is that anything that is analog and low current is almost always going to be a good candidate for sharing, presuming that it matches the same voltage of your other pedals. So if you have 9 volts, the other pedals that we'd be sharing with are also 9 volts, and they have the same polarity. So things that would be good candidates typically are things like overdrives, boosts, distortion, wah-wah. These are typically all very low current. These typically are all 9 volts, and sharing them is generally not an issue. Now, there is some confusion that has been run into when I say this to people, and they say, well, what about my tuner? Isn't that an analog pedal? No, a tuner is not an analog pedal. And often when you go to daisy chain things like tuners, you can sometimes have an issue doing it. Now, there are some exceptions on tuners. Some of them actually do have a built-in daisy chain sort of in them, and they'll have two 2.1 millimeter barrel connections in the back of them. And one is for the power supply input from your main supply, and then the second one is so that you can daisy chain off the tuner. And those typically are a little bit better filtered than just an ordinary pedal if you were going to make a splitter cable yourself. So those can sometimes work okay, but not universally. And I've certainly had issues with examples of like the TC electronic tuner, the mini one that doesn't have that secondary, splitter output for the power, has problems when you daisy chain. And often this will, occur as oscillation or some sort of weird like intermodulation issue between the pedals. The other thing that I'll add as a caveat before I pass this over to Grant is just sort of a way to kind of start ourselves off and wet our whistles as it comes to daisy chaining best practices. I generally stay away from things with clocks, even if they're analog. So an example of something with a clock would be like a tremolo or a chorus or a phaser, because sometimes depending on the maker and how they've designed the pedal and how it's grounded, you can still sometimes get weird oscillation issues, and you can actually hear the clock speed in the actual signal as you turn the speed knob up and down. And I've actually had this happen with a very reputable maker that had a chorus that had 2 channels that you could switch between. And because of the way that the product was grounded, you could actually hear as you switch between the 2 channels of the chorus and you move the speed knob. And again, this is a totally analog pedal. You would hear that through the entire system. And so those generally are not good candidates for sharing power. Anything with a clock, sometimes it's okay. But I would say generally analog, distortions, overdrives, wah pedals, boosts, these are all good places to start. Again, they have to have the same voltage, same polarity, but those are usually the safest items to start on. And again, a tuner is a digital pedal. It is not an analog pedal. Grant, your thoughts?
I think this goes back one step before even what we've chatted about. I don't know if anyone else relates, you guys or anyone listening, but when I'm setting up my board, I just want to get it done. Like I want to get to playing, I want to get to trying out the sounds, and I rush through, or have in the past before I've learned some of these lessons, I rush through some of this power stuff. Like, it'll be fine. We'll figure it out. I'll try daisy chaining these pedals. It's going to be fine. And when you're setting up your board or getting someone else to set it up or whatever you're doing, there are certain aspects of your board you do not want to rush, and power is one of them. And so I would just say with power, you absolutely can daisy chain. I would say when I'm working with customers, the thing I'm thinking about though is not just the pedals on the board today that I want to daisy chain, but the pedals they're possibly going to change them out for in the future. So you might have a position 1 overdrive, but maybe in future they're going to want to change that out for something like Mason said with a clock in it. And so if that's possible, or they're going to change it out for something that isn't going to be great for daisy chaining, that's something you're going to want to isolate now, even though it's not necessary. If they aren't someone that's going to be swapping a ton of pedals out, then you can kind of go a little bit crazy on daisy chaining. And something that I don't know if anyone again else has experienced this, but something that that people don't realize is a lot of overdrives, fuzz pedals, especially quite maybe some that are more on the simple end of things. They don't have a ton of extra features. You might be using a Strymon Zuma or a Cioks DC7. They have like 500 milliamp, 660 milliamp outputs. And you're going to put a fuzz pedal on there that draws like 2 to 8 milliamps. So you have so much extra current. You could daisy chain, 15 to 20 fuzz pedals off that one output in theory. That's not a pedal board I've ever run, but you have so much current available to you on that one output that you don't actually, you have a lot of space to use on these power supplies, even though maybe they only have 7 outlets or 9 outlets. If you do it properly and you really think through your power, you can power a lot of pedals. Perfect world, like Mason said, you have one outlet for one pedal, but it is overkill in a lot of scenarios. So I would just say don't rush your power. Test it out, set up a few pedals, and try daisy chaining different combinations, and just have a listen to your amp and the noise. The other thing I will point out is that if you have done power incorrectly, or you've daisy chained something that maybe doesn't like to be daisy chained, even if that pedal is removed from your signal chain via a true bypass loop or something like that, you can still get noise issues. So it's just something to be aware of, that the power really does penetrate through the whole board if it hasn't been done well, hasn't been thought out. So it's absolutely something you don't want to rush. You do want to test, ask questions, and make sure that you take your time on that.
Mason.
And just a quick question. I'm sorry, I was raising my hand. Trained as a public school student. One thing I will just mention about fuzzes, they can be a good candidate for sharing. You just have to make sure that the design is compatible. So depending on whether like it's NPN or PNP, these will make a difference as to whether you can share power because of the way that the polarity of the fuzz is and the transistors. So just as an aside, sometimes they are not good candidates for that reason, even though they draw very low current.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, I mean, I've had a couple boards in all the years of doing this. I've learned a lot, there's a lot of, when you're building these yourself, DIY, doing it just because you like to, you start to figure out the things that you probably should not rush on. And like you guys just said, power. And I would always have issues where people are like, yeah, I'm getting a lot of noise in my board. So they would bring it in and it was like not even something I have built. And I'm looking at it. And the first thing I notice is like their junction box. So say like a Goodwood audio interfacer is being daisy chained with a bunch of other pedals, like a one spot daisy chain. So they're daisy chaining off of every single thing. And, and it's going to a controller. So like, dedicating, your input output pedal and your switching system and anything that's higher like Strymon's to their own power will significantly make a massive difference in like your overall noise level of the board. Because you'll get some guys, oh, I'll just throw a gate on it. I'm like, yeah, but that's not gonna fix your issue. Like, I mean, it might solve some of it, but not the whole thing.
Well, I mean, if you got a Strymon and a switcher and a Goodwood audio interface and you're using a one spot daisy chain, you are a pervert. There's no easy way to say that.
It seemed pretty easy when you just said it there. It kind of just rolled off the tongue.
It just did.
Because just that on that alone, you have a few $1,000s of equipment, and then you're using a wall wart one spot. Now, this is not to be confused with the True Tone CS6, CS7, CS12. Those are fine power supplies and would be great to power those individual devices. But taking the wall wart plug, to then daisy chain off everything from there. Oh,
no, sorry. I meant they use that little ribbon cable that has all the daisies on it.
Yeah.
And plugging it into a Zuma. So like a single Zuma spot to do all that. Like that is still perverse and nobody should do that. Yeah, I would just say, I would say with overdrives, you could get away with something like that for the most part. But yeah, you can't mix analog and digital. It needs to be all analog, preferably no clocks, low current, same polarity, same voltage, and with this Strymon, it's, you don't have as many choices. You're mostly 9 volts, and then you got 2 variable voltage. Just no reason to try. And here's another thing that comes up is somebody will ask frequently in our, they'll slide into our DMs and they'll ask questions like, can I combine overdrive X and boost Y? Even though we've sort of set this general criteria. And there may be some conditions where stuff that even meets the criteria won't work. But the ultimate way is to test it yourself and see if it actually works. And a great thing to do with that provided daisy chain cable that might come with, your True Tone one spot wall wart, or, you can buy a daisy chain cable from Amazon for, I don't know, $10, $15, maybe less. Is use that to just audition pedals before you sort of solidify and turn it and make either the cables custom or order a custom length cable from, Goodwood or Brian. This will help you sort of determine if these are good candidates. In an easy way, especially if they're true bypass, to tell if there's any issue is, you can leave them both off. You can try and plug in the power from each one of them individually and see if there's any change in the noise floor. And then you can try running them together on the same output, see if there's any difference in noise versus you running individual cables to each one of them. And that can help you vet whether these are good candidates. Another thing that I saw Grant show us before we started rolling on the show this good day
is he showed a great tool that's made by True Tone called the current reader, and it's also a cable tester for those who need it. And he's holding it up on YouTube if you're watching us here. I'm sorry, I'm getting over a little cold, so if I sound sniffly, that's why.
I gotta ask. So I saw it said MA meter or reader at the bottom. So did you do 2.1 in it?
Yeah, so
I've never seen one.
Yeah, so you know, it needs to be powered by something. So you have that, and so you plug your main power supply into it, or you could use something else if you wanted, like a True Tone one spot, plugging into the input, and then the output feeds the pedal, and then it will tell you how much the pedal is drawing in current. And if you're using this for digital pedals, sometimes it's a good idea to really like max out all the knobs so that it's running the most, sort of processing power, so you can see, because sometimes knobs in different positions on digital pedals will really affect the current significantly, whereas analog, it's a pretty nominal range. So this can be a good tool to help you determine if you're not sure about sharing and current. I've even had some people that have done tone consults with us where they have a spreadsheet of every pedal that they're planning to put on the board, and then they have the corresponding voltage, polarity, and current, so that they know that, which pedals they've identified as being good candidates for sharing, and they already know the voltage, the current. So if they have 500 milliamps, let's say, on an output to work with, they know that the combination of the pedals is not exceeding that amount of current.
Okay.
But that's a really, really useful tool, and it's not very expensive. And again, it doubles as a cable tester, so you can use the additional 1/4-inch jacks that are a part of it to test the cables. But before we go into further details on daisy chaining best practices, and I'm really excited to talk to Brian, especially about the Quad Cortex, because he's been able to devise a cool way of paralleling outputs to get a 1 mega output with a ton of current on it at the same voltage. I'd love to talk to you about some of the sponsors that make our podcast possible every single week. The first of which is our friends over at Guitar Sanctuary. And if you're not aware of Guitar Sanctuary, it is one of the premier dealerships in the entire country, located in McKinney, Texas. And not only do they sell some of the best, highest end guitar amplifiers and guitar pedals available, they also house the amazing Brian O'Million at O'Million Audio. And if you're interested in getting any of the great supplies that we're talking about today, whether it be power supplies, a True Tone milliamp reader, or you're interested in having somebody like Brian put a rig together for you, you can contact him over at the Guitar Sanctuary website, which is the Guitar Sanctuary. And they have all of their products listed there that they sell, and it's pretty much anything that you could think of is available there, from kind of mainstream stuff to more boutique. And again, the great Brian O'Million is there. He's also listed on their website so that you can communicate directly with him if you haven't already slid into his DMs. Also, our friends over at Sweetwater have an amazing new app called the Sweetwater Gear Exchange, and it rivals some of the great reselling applications like Reverb and eBay, and it is specifically designed for musicians, and it is made by musicians, in fact, over at Sweetwater. And it is a great combination of sort of the peer-to-peer aspects of Craigslist mixed with kind of the organization of an eBay or a Reverb. But one of the really cool things about being a seller on this platform is if you decide to take your earnings and put them on a Sweetwater gift card, you don't pay any fees as a seller for offloading your gear. Whereas ordinarily, when you're on Reverb or eBay, you're paying a seller fee, you have transaction fees, all this stuff. It really adds up and cuts into your bottom line. And if you're somebody like me who's always buying new stuff anyway, and you're buying a lot from Sweetwater, and shout out to Todd Cotton, my sales engineer, this is a great way to go. And I found the experiences that I've had have been really great. I feel like Sweetwater's got your back. They're looking out for you. I've never had any issues. And I really think it is an amazing service that, frankly, more people should be using. And I think you should check it out over at sweetwater.com/used. You can also access it through the Sweetwater app if you don't have that on your phone already. So definitely check that out. Our friends over at Guitar Sanctuary and Sweetwater's Gear Exchange. I will now turn it back over to you, Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you to all those amazing sponsors, the store and Bestronics. Not Bestronics, Sweetwater.
But we'll talk about Bestronics.
We'll talk about Bestronics.
Don't you worry.
We got plenty of them. They're all the best. Yeah, no, I would say, I mean, another really interesting, like, it's DM, as you were saying, a question that slide in.
So we slid right in.
Yep.
DMs are open, right?
I guess. Yeah. It's funny. As you were talking, I had a question, and they asked me about.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you had a marriage proposal in your DMs.
No.
That pedalboard looks amazing. Will you marry me, Brian?
No, I get some very interesting comments on some of those things. But yeah, no, the question, it was funny as you were talking about it. Someone was asking about a quad cortex cable. So what are the odds? And before we even started talking, we kind of threw around some different types of ways that you can power said devices, like an HX Stomp. You need it's not even like a typical 2.1 cable. Like it needs more current. I think, if I could be wrong, it needs a different size barrel. Because Grant, you guys make it's a 2.5, right?
Yes, 2.5. And is it reverse polarity on the line 6 stuff? No, so it's standard polarity. And if it's not clear, what Brian's getting into is that how you can, we talked about daisy chaining, but this is more about how you parallel multiple outputs to get a super output that has like mega current to power the really, really big stuff like Helix stuff, HX Stomp, Quad Cortex. Because Brian made a beautiful example, and so did Grant, in fact, of these mega outputs. Like, I think you guys use like Cioks or something like that. Is that what you use for Seals board?
Yes. Yeah. We use the Cioks, because doing it off of a Zuma, I think I did the math. It's like 6 or 7 ports, and by that point, it's just a waste.
A whole Zuma, basically dedicated to power a Cortex.
That would be the most expensive. 279 for a Zuma, like
plus the cable.
Plus the cable and all the connector. It's a whole mess. But I will say, I mean, like, powering these specialty pedals is really important, because if you underpower a quad or HX Stomp, I learned from experience. Actually, before I did Seals board, I did another gentleman, his board, and we actually, because I Googled it and got some power requirements and stuff, and we used like a gig rig generator. But and I posted it, and everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing! I didn't know you could use it." But then I started getting like, "Oh well, it needs this power. It needs this," which we had like a doubler on there. Well, not a doubler, like a voltage. Like it changed the voltage, but the that said product could not hold up and died while trying to power the unit. And like, I started on all these issues, and the quad started not working correctly. So like, these. When it says it's a specialty cable, there's a reason for it.
Did the gig rig one say that it handled that current and voltage though?
So the gig rig is 9 volt, and I can't remember. I think it's 5 amps. Yeah. So
and how much is the Quad Cortex?
Quad. It's 3 amps, but it's 12 volts. So
I
like
see.
the voltage. Okay. So like we had a 9 to either 12 or 15 little adapter by a company that we've that it just didn't hold up very well. And as soon as we pulled all that off and everything, and I actually, and I can't take credit because I'm not the one that had the original idea. I got the quad Cioks cable, however, whatever it's been called, from Bestronics. So Brad brilliantly came up with this 4 cable Cioks looking cable, and
it's just 4 paralleled RCAs.
Yeah, and I had been communicating with him. I'm like, hey, I need to make one of these, and we, the great thing about Brad is like, he's willing to talk to you about stuff and give you some good ideas. And he was like, yeah, no, it works great. You got the comments like, oh, it's gonna triple, quadruple your voltage and stuff, but it all depends on how you wire it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for most of us, if you're building a daisy chain cable, a daisy chain and a parallel cable is the same thing. It's just how you make the cable, or like how close the terminals are to each other. And so you're just basically combining the grounds and the center conductors, the hots, and you're just combining them together at each parallel point, and then that's only increasing the current. A voltage doubler is wired differently, and if you're curious about that, I will link in the show notes here on YouTube, so you can see the difference between how to wire a current doubler versus a voltage doubler versus just like a Y cable, where
Don't
you're
mix
sort
those
of
up.
daisy chaining. Yeah, don't mix them up. They are different things. Also, if you're doing it on a Cioks, it's different because RCA's for a standard polarity, the shield will be in the center, and the hot will be on the sleeve. So just so you know.
Which took me quite a while to figure out at first. I'm like making these cables, and I had like made a bunch of them up. And then this is like a couple years ago when I first started doing more Cioks, because I don't see many of the. I wouldn't see a lot of Cioks come through, but they're coming more and more around. Especially because of the type of output they do. But I had that exact thing. I was like, what the heck? Why isn't it working? Why can't I get this to? And I'm like, I'm doing it. And I tried it on a DC. Okay, it's not the cable. And I'm like, what the? And I was like, it has to be the unit. This unit has to be. No, it was me not realizing
they're inverted.
But I would say, I mean, underpowering pedals, is not good, obviously, for it. And it's just being really observant of, checking the manual, checking out the type of polarity that it is. Are you guys, are you making all of your own power cables for these types of things? Or do you have go-to recommendations? Because I know Grant has a whole custom website for custom power cables, which I send people to all the time.
Thank you,
I'm like, if you need that custom HX Stomp cable, go to him. Like, I make some of these Cioks cables, but not very often. But I would say, is there any kind of like rule of like, I'm trying to figure out how I want to word this.
Let's go for it.
I just try
in Spanish.
Are there any like go-to like units that you'll go, like, so if someone is wanting to do like let's say Quad Cortex hybrid board and stuff, what is your recommendation? Because hybrid boards are kind of becoming more of the thing, like right now. Like you'll see people with helixes and pedals and stuff. Like, are you guys recommending 2 separate power supplies, combining boxes? Is combining 2 IEC connectors into a single like PowerCon box or something of the sort a good idea? Like, what do you guys typically recommend people that have, think about it like this way. If they have, do I even have one? They have one of these like AC, one of those 2-prong, those old, like the Carl Martin. Like Carl Martin has a hardwired plug, those kind of things. Is it wise to plug that into the courtesy outlet of a Mondo Voodoo Lab? Like, does those kind of things make a massive difference? I don't know. Just, I got a whole lot.
I will try and stay with one power supply if I can. And even now, we're again chatting before the show. For a hybrid board, if it's a Quad Cortex, right away I'm recommending Cioks, just because you need so few outlets to power Quad Cortex off of Cioks in comparison to like a Strymon product. But now even more so, the Cioks has come out with the Crux. And so the Crux you can plug out of the 24-volt outlet on, which is used for daisy chaining power supplies. You can plug in the Crux, and that'll power the Quad Cortex all on its own without using any of the standard RCA outlets. So now you have a DC7 for a hybrid board, and you have 7 available outlets, plus a second 8th outlet, in air quotes, for the Crux, which then powers a Quad Cortex. So I would always try and use as few power supplies as possible to get the job done, while still thinking about, future changes, possible changes that might come up. So that's where I try and start from. We have done, plenty of boards where we do a IEC split on the input with it, with creation as an example. We have the elevation board, and we might get custom cable from them for the IEC split to go to multiple supplies, and haven't had issues with that. But I'm curious to see what Mason has to say on it.
Yeah. I think, excuse me, the Crux is a great tool, I think, to have for those higher current things. I think the one thing that people have to keep in mind, though, when you're doing sort of the power supply combining, if you're using, let's say, the 24 volt outlet that feeds other power supplies, or if you're using, whether it be Cioks or Strymon or whatever, you have to remember that the total amount of current available doesn't start over when you add on a new supply. And I think that this is one point of confusion that some people have, is that unless you have a new set, and unless you have AC mains going into that supply, you're restricted to the current that's available in the primary supply that receives the AC. And Cioks is really great about this because on all of their devices, they have a meter on the supply that shows how much of the current total available in the main supply is being used as you expand it. So you can see if you're at 60% of max or 80% of max or 90% of max. Strymon doesn't show you that. In fact, I don't think any other companies show you that. And this is a good thing to know, especially if you're going to be using a lot of really high current things that draw a high percentage of the total. That being something like a Quad Cortex or a HXFX or whatever it might be. This is really valuable information to know because I've only seen this once, but I've seen one example of somebody who expanded, had a lot of really high current stuff on Strymons, and they wouldn't always have an issue, but they would have intermittent power issues because they were too extended on the current off of the mains. Because again, you don't get to, if your supply, let's say, has 5 amps available, it doesn't start all over again at 5 amps when you go to the next supply. Like you're restricted to whatever the total current is. So unless you go with another supply that takes AC, in the back, like a Zuma or the Cioks 7 or, True Tone doesn't expand, but you get the Fender engine room is another one that can do this. These things, they need to be able to have a new set of mains in order to start current over. Grant's raised his hand.
I took a note from your book, man. The raising the hand's great. Just to clarify, or maybe say in a different way what you're saying. Let's say you have a Ojai as a really easy example. 5 outlets, 500 milliamps an outlet. Quick math tells me that's 2.5 amps. So if you have the first Ojai in your chain running 2 amps total across all those outlets, and then you daisy chain to another Ojai, a second Ojai, that Ojai, even though it can in theory run 500 milliamps per outlet, you will have a max. Since you had 500 milliamps left over from the first Ojai, you will only be able to run a total of 500 milliamps across the next 5 outlets. Is that right?
So if you were running, it may not be that that's true if you're using like the supply that comes with the Ojai, if you're running that on its own. Like, they come with sort of like, it almost looks like a computer charger.
Brick.
I don't know. That's where that would be the device that would determine the amount of available current. Because basically, when you get an Ojai, it's taking this part of the switch mode power supply and putting it out into that sort of computer charger where the mains come in before it then gets converted into DC and then comes into the Ojai. So it may be that that supply provides more than 2.5 amps. And I don't know what that number is that the larger power supply like unit.
I think it was 3 amps from memory.
Yeah. So then you would basically, if you expand it, you would have 3 amps available between the two supplies. Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
No, that's good. That's a good point.
This is just something to be aware of. There's very few, I think, examples where this has actually come into play that I've ever seen. I've just seen that one. But the Cioks is really useful in that regard, in that it actually tells you physically, this is what you have available, and this is how far you're running this thing in the red, if at all. But before we continue along this topic, which I think is very important, I believe Grant has a few sponsors to talk to us about that make the show possible every week.
Now, Brian's already stolen my thunder a little bit on this by hinting at I'm just bugging who I'm going to chat about. So let's start with Bestronics, because they are the best in the business, as their name suggests. Bestronics, we've already mentioned Brad, who is my favorite person at Bestronics. He is always around to help out. And I even told Brad this the other day, how, I look after the Bestronics ad, and I've kind of come up with, because it's just turned out to be true, every week I have a new Bestronics story of how Brad has helped me out with something I can't find. And the company, like I've been saying in past weeks, small enough to give me personal service, large enough to have everything I need. And so if you need pedalboard parts, supplies, cable, plugs, they carry a whole range from a bunch of different brands. So I know you guys would experience this as well. Some weeks I need a specific plug from Switchcraft, as I find my words. The next week I need something from Neutrik. And then last week I needed a red jacketed cable. And Bestronics is able to help me find all of those different products. So check out Bestronics, btpa.com, and use the code, wait for it, DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, to get 10% off your order. And just ask for Brad. Brad's a great guy. He'll help you out.
Yep. He's available to all of us, not just the chairman.
Yeah,
Brad Bartosz.
He's great. A great source of help in our industry. And maybe just quiz him on a product code and see if he knows it off by heart, just for fun. So that's Bestronics. And then the other one I wanted to chat to you guys about, another one that we're all familiar with and we all use, is monocreators.com. They make the best gig bags in the industry. I wouldn't recommend you guys doing this, but I have done it when I was forced to by an airline. I flew with my massive pedal board and I put it in a Mono Creator soft bag. The airline last minute forced me to put it underneath for the whole flight. I was worried the whole flight about this thing. Showed up on the other end perfectly fine. And the padded bags, although they are not a flight case, they protect your gear, whether it's a guitar. I know Mason loves the double gig bag. Brian uses their backpacks. They make great gear. They also do my favorite pedal train style angled board. The reason I like it a whole lot more than the pedal train stuff is there's so much room underneath. And for myself, when we're always building junction boxes with, quite large boxes that have to have double stacked jacks and they're quite high, they can fit underneath an angled board, no issue, but they'll only fit under something like a mono angled board. So tons of room, super lightweight, very strong. They have a whole bunch of other products to check out, but those are kind of my personal highlights. So check out monocreators.com. The code for that one is chairman, CHAIRMEN, and you'll get 10% off your order.
10% off. So 10%,
good. 10%. As Mason likes to say, that is 90% away from free.
Yep.
So check that out. Brian, back to you, man.
Yeah. Thank you again to those amazing sponsors. Yes, I have multiple. I would say I would have the wet, dry, wet setup of mono stuff. I have more than one. I do not have a single one.
I mean, man, some of us have had mono, going all the way back to high school.
Right?
The kissing disease.
Still going strong.
Still going strong. Yeah. Shout out Megan. She gave me mono. I remember. Hope you're doing well.
Oh my gosh. She's watching like
SOB.
But yeah, I mean, I'm curious if what are your guys's don'ts of daisy chaining? Like, do you have any rules when it comes to you like oh, I don't, certain modulation pedals. I know we already talked about, delays, like digitals and analog stuff, but if you were doing just analog pedals, are there some that you guys don't recommend daisying together? If you don't have, if you're in a dire need and you daisy chain two pedals that are analog together, do you stay away from certain ones? Because I know daisy chaining and sharing power like that sometimes can affect how they sound. I've had people say that, oh, I can hear the difference. Do you guys agree that daisy chaining can change the tonal difference of the pedal? I know that was kind of a bit of a long question. I'd summarize it by saying, do you think daisy chaining can change the difference in tone of how that pedal reacts?
I think my biggest don't for this, I've alluded to a little bit already, is to rush through the process. Obviously, like Mason was saying earlier, stay away from digital, stay away from things with clocks. If it has a screen on it, I usually just say don't even bother trying. But for the most part, I would say not rushing. I think one of the things we haven't touched on in this arena yet on the episode is what Mason was saying about oscillation or the noise floor. So, if you want to hear what poor power sounds like, daisy chaining something you shouldn't, daisy chain like a timeline with an overdrive. And you're going to start hearing a high-pitched ring, especially when you start turning up that grit knob. You're going to hear oscillation, which comes through as a ring. And you don't want to obviously have that in your signal chain unless that's the sound you're going for. Who am I to say that you don't want to have bad power in your rig? I personally don't. But that's kind of what one of the examples of daisy chaining gone wrong, which could be its own separate episode, guys. Daisy chaining gone wrong. We can get some good shots of that.
Daisy chaining gone wild. Spring break, Cabo San Lucas.
So that's kind of a bad example, and give it a shot if you don't know what that sounds like. But the other thing is a noise floor. So you might hear more hiss, you might hear more noise that wasn't there in the past. I know, Brian, you'd get this. Mason, you'd get this. People will come back to me after I've done a setup for them. I'm like, it's just so quiet. Thank you guys so much. You guys are awesome. And I very quickly tell them that is not us. That is just good power, good cable, and the noise floor just tends to drop. If you follow a couple of simple rules, which we're outlining today, some of the key ones, like it's not the builder. I'm sorry to take the wind out of our sails here a little bit. We do not have a magic touch for that. We just follow some basic principles like powering the pedals well and using some good shielded cable, and your noise floor will drop. That noise, that hiss, that extra little grit that's in the background of your system when you don't really want it to be. So that would be probably my biggest don't around that, is just don't rush it. Just take your time with this, test it out, see which one's quieter. For the question around does it change the sound of the pedal? I can't speak for every example. I would say typically no. If you are giving it the power it requires, enough milliamps, you aren't starving it. I don't think you should hear a change in the pedal, although I'm happy to be proven wrong if you guys have other experiences.
Well, as Grant says, no Russian power.
Is that what I say?
No Russian.
No Russian power.
Or did you say no rushing power?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
No Russian power.
Controversial.
Yeah. As to the question of would it affect the sound, it only would affect the sound if for some reason the you had the current maxed out and these pedals were competing for current in some way. And it would have to be a relatively low current output if you're talking about overdrives or something like that. Typically, the only thing that I could think of that would possibly have a sound difference if there's in the current limiting aspect, if there's some sort of competition for current between pedals that are on at the same time, that wouldn't just go automatically into a failure mode, would be overdrives or distortions and things like that. But I can't see an example where they would sound different if they were combined and good candidates to be shared. I don't see that there would be any negative consequence. And if you believe that there is, you can always test it, evaluate it for yourself, see if you're noticing any differences. If you are, then that'll be omitted by way of the fact that it's not sounding good to you. So you can always play this game. And again, this is why I recommended earlier that you get a daisy chain cable, even if it's the one off Amazon, so that as you're vetting the pedals that you want to put on the pedal board that you want to share power with, that you're able to identify which ones are good candidates that don't have any negative symptoms of sharing, and then you move forward from there. And again, the basic criteria is same voltage, low current, analog, no clocks. Again, so example of clocks, chorus, almost all the modulation stuff, phaser, flanger, delays, even if they're analog, those are going to have clocks in them. So you want to stay away from stuff like that. as far as combining. Best candidates: boost, overdrive, wah, buffers in many cases can be okay.
About volume pedals.
Well, typically an active volume pedal is just a buffer in a regular volume pedal, so those should probably be okay too. I haven't tried stuff like the Ernie Ball tuner one. I would say probably no on that one because again, a tuner is digital. So I generally wouldn't do tuners. Although some tuners, as I said earlier, have like a paralleled output that has some sort of filtering on it. And sometimes if it's just for a single pedal, that might work okay. And you can always test it to see if it makes any difference noise-wise. As Grant mentioned, some fuzzes, again, there can be some issues with certain types of transistors where they can't be shared. And so just validate that with the manufacturer if you're not sure that it is able to be shared without consequence. A lot of newer fuzz companies are making that adaptation that maybe are trying to make them a little bit more pedalboard friendly, but some guys that are making it like true to a vintage, fuzz, they won't make any compromises in terms of the way that it's built to accommodate, the idea of daisy chaining. So just be aware of that. I think it's a good idea to get something like that True Tone milliamp reader that Grant had shown earlier. I think it's a good idea when you're assembling the board and getting it together that you make a list of all your products, the voltages, the polarities, the current, so that you already have a sense, at least visually, of where everything is and whether your power supply total current will meet that. And you can always look up that information on all the main power supplies, whether it be, a Cioks, a Strymon, a True Tone, whatever. It'll tell you what the total available current is, which is different than sometimes the individual calculations of each output. So usually it's slightly higher than that. And so you kind of know where you are in relationship to the pedals that you have.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I want to mention one more of our sponsors before we kind of wrap this up, is Creation Music Company. We all have used them before. I use them. Like I said, if I have less than 5 orders come in a week from them, then it's a slow week. But they are running a promo code Chairman15 for 15% off. It does not apply to everything, so there are some exclusions. So I would just go on their website and check them out. They make great pedal boards and everything, and they are a great sponsor of ours, and we love Creation. We have our 4th chairman who is just
the half chairman.
Finally,
the half
something
chairman.
was missing.
Chairman. Yeah. Yes.
Hey, Oakley.
Well, guys,
He's pumped.
It's been a great episode. Are there any? I mean, I know we've kind of circled around, a lot of these topics, but are there any final thoughts when it comes to powering pedals? Daisy chain. If obviously the don't rush rule and everything. Someone that's going to do it themselves.
Power.
No Russian power.
Oh no.
Grant, do you have anything that you want to kind of settle up and finish on before we let everyone move on with their day?
I would say something that I haven't mentioned yet. If you're gonna be making your own power cables, which can be really handy, it can be a really good thing to be able to do. I would absolutely get a multimeter just so you can triple check everything. A multimeter, you can get them for really cheap, $30, I think. Would allow you to test the polarity to make sure that it's correct. It can test the voltage outlet. It can, if you're doing a voltage doubler versus current doubler, it just kind of is a safety net if you're new to this stuff. But I think it would be a really smart thing if you're, diving deep on this stuff. You want to power a whole bunch of different things. I think it would be really smart to just have a current doubler on hand, to have a voltage doubler on hand, and be able to kind of go from there and really take your time on this stuff. Power is one of those things where there's probably about 4 or 5 things you really need to understand: barrel size, polarity, current, and voltage. If you can really understand those things at just a rudimentary level, all of this stuff just kind of comes together and really starts to make sense. So just ask a lot of questions. Don't be scared of sounding stupid or anything for, asking basic questions, because once you get it, you're going to be really grateful that you did. And then Oakley will be here to cheer you on. And that's really what we're all after. I just want a word of affirmation from Oakley. So that would be kind of my main point there.
Okay. What about you, Oakley? What do you have to say?
He's
What do
just
you
like
say, Oakley?
breathing down the mic. This kid's got courage, man. That's awesome.
That foam cover is gonna be soaked.
Oh yeah, no, we got some boogers on here and
Yes.
and some snot from the young half chairman here, Oakley,
Yes.
the number one baby in tone, right, Oakley?
Number one baby.
I think that for the most part, I think we're good. I think we touched on best practices for daisy chaining. I think we identified some cool products, further with power supplies that are great at what they do, about how to expand and parallel things properly. We learned about the True Tone current reader, which is a valuable tool. We learned about the Cioks Crux if you have to power a Neural DSP Quad Cortex or some of the higher current line 6 stuff. This is a great thing to just take the 24 volt out, go into this, and now you can provide adequate power to your larger current items, in addition to powering some of your smaller pedals with just the main Cioks 7, let's say, or something like the Strymon Ojai also has that 24 volt out. We talked about paralleling cables. I think that this is at least a good start, and if you feel incomplete, you can slide into our DMs, and we would be happy to talk power with you. And as Grant always says, there is it's not a good idea to be Russian power. So no Russian power, and that's Russian with an IN apostrophe, short of rushing power. I know it sounds like I'm saying something different, but that's what we mean.
Yes, just to clarify.
Yeah. No, I would just finish off by saying, like, if you're unsure about certain power requirements, if the pedal doesn't say, like, a lot of the pedals will say 9 volt, 9V, 18V, whatever it is, it'll be a requirement. If you're unsure what it is, the polarity of it, the milliamp draw, you can not all, but most manufacturers have power requirements in their manuals. If they don't, you can always reach out and ask them. I would just never go and guess that something is 12 volt or 18 volt, because some pedals will blow up. I have blown up a KTR, unfortunately, because of that exact reason. Yeah. So it's happened before, and it was my personal one years ago. And yeah, so as you can see, there's just things you gotta be careful of. Don't rush and put power.
Yep.
And
Thank you.
yeah, but and some pedals can kind of do both. Like, it can be ran at 9 or 18. So check out the specs. But that's all I have. You guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you later.
All right, take it easy, Chairman. Until
See you
next
guys.
week. Further down the road to Tone Town.
Yes, sir.
I think we did a good job. I think we got a little further, and thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.
All right. See ya.